Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Dynamics GP Tips and Tricks Utilizing Multicurrency for Better Processes. I am Megan Turco, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm going to briefly go over how to use your webinar console. The orange arrow on the right side of your screen will let you toggle the control tray open or closed, and at the bottom of that control tray, you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. Additionally, on your GoToWebinar console, you should see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. And alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option. Additionally, I do want to note that today's webinar is being recorded. We'll send out the slides as well as a link to the recording of the webinar within about 48 hours, so please keep an eye out for this email if you're interested in accessing the webinar after today or sharing it with any colleagues who couldn't be with us live today. And with that, I would like to introduce today's webinar presenters. First, we have Megan Fall, who is a senior consultant on our Dynamics GP team here at Armanino. Megan has over 6 years of experience implementing and supporting GP. She's a Microsoft certified professional in GP financials, supply chain, and implementation with extensive experience in Management Reporter and Integration Manager. We also have Seher Ahmed with us today, who's also a senior consultant on our GP practice. Seher has years of experience supporting and implementing Dynamics GP and is also a Microsoft certified professional in GP financials, inventory, and order processing. And with that, I'm going to give it over to you, Seher.
Okay, so today we'll be going over multi-currency setup and maintenance. We're going to be also going over the revaluation process, inquiries and reporting. We'll also be going over some common issues and errors, and then lastly, we'll be going over any questions. So the first topic is multi-currency setup. Now for multi-currency setup, the first thing that you need to do is set up your currency ID. With that currency ID, you also have to enter a description. The one thing that I do want to mention that if you have multiple companies that currency ID needs to be enabled in, you only have to do it once. You have to grant the access, which I'll show you later, to the other companies. So again, this will only need to happen once. You'll also have to enter an ISO code, and the ISO code is actually, it's a default that was set by the International Organization for Standardization. It's a 3-letter code that is alpha, and it's designated for all recognized countries. You'll also enter a symbol for your currency ID. You'll also enter the separators, which would be period, comma, and then you can also indicate how many decimal places you'd like for that currency ID. You can also enter terminology such as dollars and cents. You'll also notice that in a lot of these screens, there's an additional button for either accounts or rate maintenance. Those are shortcuts to other windows. So you will see me go back and forth on some of those windows, but you do have that option to click to the next setup window. So here where you see that accounts button, you can link the accounts for the realized and unrealized gains and losses. So the next step is to go ahead and set up your exchange table. The path to this is Tools, Setup, System, Exchange Table. Now here you would go ahead and enter your exchange table ID. You would also enter your description, and then you would associate the currency ID that you set up previously to the exchange table. We will also enter a rate source. This is where you're pulling your exchange rates. For example, here we have the Wall Street Journal. Now, if you're doing multi-currency transactions monthly, then you can manually enter them. But if you're doing them weekly or on a day-to-day process, I would recommend subscribing to a third party. And at that point, if you are interested in that, please let us know, and we can always give you details to third parties that we recommend as far as subscribing to. Now, the rate frequency is the frequency that you enter on how you plan to enter those exchange rates, and it'll determine the expiration date displayed for each exchange rate. If you selected weekly, for example, the exchange rate will be valid for 7 days from the day you enter in the date field, which I'll show you in the following slides. You'll also enter a rate variance, and you'll also enter a rate calculation method, which is either to multiply or divide by that exchange rate. Now the transaction rate default, exact date would be, if you mark this option, it's an exchange rate date that is the same as the transaction date. If you select previous date, If there isn't a valid exchange rate within the days searched prior to the transaction date, the most recent valid exchange rate following the transaction date will be displayed. If you select next date, what will happen is the most recent valid exchange prior to the transaction date will be displayed. You can also search for unexpired rates. You can select either unlimited or limited, or you can add in the number of days that you'd want the rates to be searched. Here you can also see that there's a button to get to rates, but we will actually go to access. So furthermore, if you've already have your exchange rate and currency ID set up, I think the next best step would be to go ahead and enable your access. The one thing that you want to be aware of is that this window is locked down when other users are logged into the system. You want to be sure that all users are logged off in order to get to the screen. And in this screen, you can see that all of our currencies are listed. So just as I was stating before, once you set up your currency ID, you don't have to do it multiple times in each company. You can come into this window and actually grant access to that currency and that exchange table. The other thing that you'll notice is you have the inactivate button available. So you can use this to temporarily stop using a currency or an exchange table without deleting or removing a company's access to it. So for example, if there's a currency exchange rate that's fluctuating dramatically, you might want to stop conducting business in that currency until that currency stabilizes. So this is a good feature where you can temporarily inactivate either the currency or the exchange table. So now moving forward with our main multi-currency window, this is located under Tools, Setup, Financials, Multi-Currency. So here we have our functional currency, which would be US dollars, and our reporting currency would be Australian dollars. So that means that our business is basically doing all of those transactions in US dollars. However, in this example, let's say that our company is owned by an Australian company and we want all of our reporting to be done in Australian dollars. So that's why we have the functional currency as US dollars and the reporting currency as Australian dollars. We'll also enter an exchange rate. We'll also enter a calculation method, whether we want to multiply or divide by our exchange rate. We'll also have rate type IDs that are available for that currency. Furthermore, we have the currency translation default exchange table IDs. So here you'll actually select the currencies to translate. So if you have multiple currencies, even outside of the Australian dollar, if you're also going to be doing business in Canadian dollars, for example, you would select that currency. You'll add, in our example, we have average Australian dollars added, so we would go ahead and add that to current, historical, average, and budget. We also have additional options for security, such as using rates without adding them to a table. So you can actually go into a transaction, update the rate, and even if it doesn't exist in the table, we can go ahead and still process that transaction. We can also either remove or modify those rates. We can override a rate, we can override a rate variance, or we can override reporting rates. You also have that option to add a password to this. So a lot of people don't know that these options exist, but they are out there. What's already selected is the norm that we see with many companies. We also have the default transaction rate types listed. Here we have average across the board for financial, sales, and purchasing. Down at the bottom, we have maintain history, and that's just asking if we want to maintain history in the general ledger. Last removal would have to do with any of the history that we removed, which hasn't been done yet. That's why it's blank here. The other thing that I really like about the screen is that it shows you the last revaluation that was done in each of those modules, financial, sales, and purchasing. That's a good one to look at if you're going new into this position and you're not really sure if revaluation was done. You can always take a glance in this window to see when it was last done. So once a functional currency is added, you will receive a pop-up, and the pop-up says you've entered new functional currency setup information. Check links for the multi-currency setup file to update currency fields. So when you've selected that functional currency, you're going to need to complete this task. What it's going to do is assign the selected functional currency ID to any existing transaction records out there. The path to this is Microsoft Dynamics GP, Maintenance, Checklinks, and you'll select Financials, and you'll select Multicurrency Setup. Now, this process will have to be done in each company. Even if you only set up that functional currency in that specific company, you'll have to do it across the board. Now, I do want to remind you that anytime Checklinks is run, we recommend that all users have exited GP and that there is a SQL backup in place just in case anything needs to goes wrong and we need to restore from that backup. So the next step is to assign a rate type ID to the exchange table. What that is the rate type distinguishes between different exchange rates, such as a buy rate from a sell rate, by limiting the rate types to the appropriate rate exchange table. So when you're entering transactions, the currency and the rate type will identify the exchange rate table that will be used for calculating those transaction amounts. So here, what we did was we added our exchange table ID that was set up in our second task, and we went ahead and added the description. We also associated the currency ID. We have our rate source listed of where we're getting our exchange rates from. You'll also see that rate frequency, which is set up for monthly, and then we also have the rate variance, which is also set up. And then down below, you also have the additional options such as the rate calculation method, the transaction rate default, the unexpired rates, and what to base the exchange rate on. So you'll see the available rate type that's listed. We had already determined that we would use average, so we would insert average. Once it's inserted, you have two options. You have one to either go to that account, and you can go to, not go to that account, but go to the currency ID and then go ahead and associate your default posting accounts. You have an option to do that there. This comes up a few times, so this isn't the only place that you have to do this in. You also have the option here to go to your actual exchange rates. Again, there are many shortcuts available through each screen, and there is a report that I'll be reviewing with you guys a bit later to show you how to determine if you are correctly set up with multi-currency. So moving forward, we'll be going over the the exchange rate maintenance. Now, what that is the exchange rate maintenance is used to assign individual exchange rates to the exchange rate table. So it's located under Tools, Setup, System, Exchange Table, Rates button. And again, the only time you go into this window is if you're manually adding an exchange rate. If you have a third party enabled, that would auto-populate this window. The other time you would go into this window is, say, if you have a transaction that either has a problem with its rate type or its rate type doesn't exist. Problem meaning that maybe there's an exchange, there's an expiration date that probably has already been hit for that rate. So you would just go into this window and modify an existing rate, or you can add a rate on the fly. So we have, again, our exchange table ID listed. We have our description and our currency ID that is associated to that exchange table. The date would either, depending on what version of GP you're on, would auto default with the date that you're logged in as. The time would also auto default. The exchange rate is the rate that you would add, and the expiration date is the date that the rate would expire. You have the calculation method, again, which you can either add to multiply or divide, and again, you can base your exchange rate on the functional currency or euro currency. So in our example, what we have is, I know the dates are a little bit off, but say we have a monthly frequency. If we go ahead and add in a date for June 1st, 2015, our expiration date, if it's monthly, it would then expire by July 1st, 2015. So that's what that rate frequency is. The next thing is the account currency update. So just like I said, this, as you saw, the accounts option came up multiple times in multiple windows, but I actually like to take a look at this task last. And what this is this screenshot is just for one account. There is an option for a mass update, which I'll show you a bit later. So the path to get to this window is Cards, Financial, account currency. And what you would do is you would select your currency, your account. You would select if you would like to use it as a revalue account, which I'll explain a bit later. And then you would go ahead and select the button for period balances or net change, account, or financial offset. The currency translation type, if you're going to be using average, buy or sell, you want to go ahead and select that, and then you would select the currencies that you want associated to the account. And again, this is only a single account. There's a mass update window, which I'll show you in the next couple of slides. So moving on, that completes the setup for multi-currency, and it goes over a little bit of the maintenance, which would be the exchange rates. Again, we'll be going over a little bit of the reporting of how to confirm if you are correctly set up with multi-currency. The next thing that I'd like to review is the revaluation process, which is done at month end. It's a process a lot of people are trying to figure out because it is something that it's a little tricky if you haven't done it before, and if you would like to continue working with it moving forward. What the revaluation process is that it's used and created to post transactions for gains and losses associated with fluctuating exchange rates. So you can indicate whether you want to calculate realized or unrealized gains and losses during revaluation. If you select to calculate unrealized gains and losses, you can reverse the posting. However, if you select to calculate realized gains and losses, you cannot reverse the posting. You can print a revaluation report to show the unrecognized gains and losses for multi-currency transactions if you were to post those revaluation transactions. So we always recommend that you kind of print what's almost like an edit list for each revaluation prior to posting in order to review. So to make sure that you are correctly set up, so again, we're going back to that same window for the single account update. And again, I'll show you the mass account update. So you'll navigate to cards, financial, account currencies. And here you're going to select the account. When you select the account, you're going to go ahead and select to revalue the account. Turning on that option, that's what enables the whole process to work. If you don't have this selected, that account will not be included when you run that process. Again, you can select to revalue and whether to post the revaluation results to the account or to the financial offset. By posting to the account being revalued, the account reflects the appropriate value due to the gain or the loss posted. By posting the financial offset account, the offset account reflects the gain or loss rather than the posting account. So moving forward, this is the mass account update window. I really like this window because you can put in a filter or a restriction of how many accounts that you'd like included to make that update on. So you would navigate to cards, financial, currency account update. And here again, you would add that restriction. You would select the update revalue option. However, you can see that there's also multiple items available, such as assigning a currency ID to those accounts, updating currency translation for multiple accounts, updating whether you'd want the postings to be by net change or period balances, whether you'd want the results for revaluation to post to the account or financial offset, or if you just need to, again, update your currencies that are tied to those accounts. So the posting account setup. Now these are the default accounts that will be used for revaluation of all currencies. So again, this will hit all currencies in that posting account setup window. So that is located under Tools, Setup, Posting Accounts. So what I've boxed right there is all of those accounts that will be hit during that process. However, if you opt to set up different accounts for different currencies, you also can use that option. You would just use in that posting account setup window, you would just make sure that those accounts are blank. And so if they're blank, they will then use the accounts that are associated to the currency ID that we have listed here. So under Tools, Setup, financial currency accounts, we'll choose the currency ID, and then we'll go ahead and enter those realized gain, loss, and unrealized gain and loss and financial offset here in this window. So here's the actual process to printing and posting the revaluation. The path to doing this is under Financial, Routines, Revaluation. Now I do want to remind you guys that this needs to be done at month end prior to any transactions posted in the following month. So again, month end before any transactions are posted in the following month. Another thing that you have to be aware of is this process must be done in the following order, which would be in payables, receivables, and then the GL. So the first step is to enter a revalue option. If this is your first time doing it, I would name the revalue option so that you can easily recognize what it's for. In my example, I just put test 2, but you can go ahead and put in AP or AR or GL. Once you go ahead and enter revalue options, you want to click on the button to print the report only. That will kind of give you an edit list to review before you post. Then you'll select calculate gain or loss for realized or unrealized. Once that's entered, then you will enter the month end date. Depending on what version of GP you're on, that month end date might default, but again, that totally depends on what version of GP you're on. Then you'll click on the revalue button. We do have the print report button selected, but you do have to click on the revalue button to print that report. And again, you're not posting because you have that selected. So to show you what that report looks like, for our first example, we have an account that's 000-1200-00. So if we look at that one, we can look at the unrealized gain, which is $255.48, and we have an unrealized loss of $0. Now, how do we confirm that is right? Now, if we go to our next slide, I'll show you that you have your originating amount for that first account, which is $469.18. You can also see the original exchange rate, which was 68 cents. If we multiply column B by column C, the amount will be $323.69, which you could see that functional amount on that printout. Now, after reevaluation, we see that the originating amount is for $469.18, but we have that new exchange rate that was the average rate at month end of $1.23. If we multiply that, it's going to be $579.17 of the new functional amount. So the difference would be a gain of $255.48. So that's how you're seeing that calculation. And in my example, we only have that for the first account. The next ones are similar. So you are doing the originating amount multiplied by the exchange rate, which will give you the functional amount. So inquiry and reporting. So if you are working with multi-currency, you do sometimes want to figure out if you can be able to see an amount, a transaction amount in both the functional and the originating, and GP does have the ability to do that. So in this example, I have the path to look at detail for financials. So it's under inquiry, financial, detail, and under view, we have currency, and currency you can select then if you want to see the results in functional, originating, or reporting. You can also, again, it gives you the option to modify a reporting rate. Now this is for GP 2013. This might look a little bit different depending on what version of GP you're on. Now I mentioned earlier that when it comes to multi-currency and seeing that there's so many setup windows involved, we also have a list here of reports that are available in GP. I highly recommend the setup report. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit, but you have multiple options to reviewing either the account setup for multi-currency, the main setup of multi-currency. You also can review any of the revaluation reports, the historical reports. And for example, again, the setup report looks like this. We have our functional currency, our reporting currency, our exchange rate. We also have the method listed. We also have those permissions that I was explaining earlier about, if you want to modify the rate, if we allow that or not. We also have the rate display, the general ledger account history. We also have the series listed for the rate types, and we have general information such as when was revaluation last done. Now, when you print this report, and if you see anything at the bottom where it says revaluation, we haven't done that yet, so that will be a 0. But if we have anything up above, like the functional currency is blank or the reporting currency is blank, that'll tell you that that's something that you missed and you will have to go back and actually correct. So this is a good report to double check if your multi-currency is set up correctly. And again, in that previous slide, it shows you how to get to those reports and how to print them. So how to include multi-currency information on posting journals or trial balances, for example. You can include the multi-currency information in the posting setup window, and that's located under Tools, Setup, Posting. Now the one thing is that this window might not be available for all users. This might be locked down for some users, but here you want to go ahead and select the series, what module, the origin, which would be the window that you're working in. And sorry about that, you can see that some of my boxes have moved a bit, but include multi-currency is what I wanted boxed there. But if that is selected, that will show you the multi-currency information on the posting journal. Now under the trial balance report on the right, we have an option prior to printing a trial balance, you can include that multi-currency box. So again, you just have to go into the report options and select multi-currency info. And again, I apologize for the boxes being a little off, but for both windows, it is include multi-currency info. Now to go over a few of the common issues and errors that we see. One of the common issues that we get on the support desk is we'll see an edit list that shows that the exchange rate does not exist. Now, it doesn't go into more detail than that, it just leaves it as that. So what does that mean? That means that you do want to review your exchange rate table. What that means is the rate probably has expired or no longer exists in that table. If the rate exists but is outside of the time frame of the expiration date, you can go ahead and modify that rate and increase the number of days that it expires, or you can go ahead and on the fly add that exchange rate. This is fairly common and comes up quite often. The next one is that the currency ID cannot be selected in the transaction entry screen. We do see this often. Customers will say, I just set up a currency ID and I associated accounts to it, but I'm unable to add that currency ID. Because the access window cannot be opened when other users are logged in, sometimes they'll leave that task last as far as granting access to the company. So it's most likely that that currency ID has not been granted the correct access in the access window. Another thing that we see quite often is that revaluation is missed in the previous month, and they've already been a week into the current month and they don't know what to do. So at that point, if you missed revaluation, a trick that you can do is clicking on the system date, which is located at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you click on the system date and trick it to be the month end date, you can go ahead and continue your revaluation process. Just remember that you have to update that user date once you're done with the process. And it will default, the month end date will default across revaluation. So that's one way to trick the system. But again, this only works if you have not posted any multi-currency transactions in the current month. If you have posted in the current month, then you can go ahead and definitely contact us and we can walk you through the processes. It is a little lengthy, but we can definitely do that. And that wraps up the common issues and errors.
Thanks, Sahar. So actually we are just about out of time, so we can't get to some of your questions today. It looks like some of them we did, Sahar was able to answer as she was continuing to explain a few things in there. But if you did submit a question or have any further questions, definitely feel free to reach out to Megan and Sahar. Their contact info is up on the screen there. And as I mentioned earlier, we will definitely send out the slides and also a link to the recording of the webinar in probably about 48 hours or so here. So definitely keep an eye out for that. As you exit today, there is a quick survey, so take a moment to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar so that we can continue bringing you some great content in these webinars. We'd like to make sure that they are beneficial for you. And thank you to our lovely presenters for today.